Hello, Daniel here. If you're wondering why I'm suddenly sounding a bit posh, it's because I'm going through a rough patch and using an AI version of myself instead. Know who else uses AI to help us? Our sponsors, Turn2. I've said a few times on the podcast that science and research is not my strong point, as I struggle to process and retain information due to the cognitive dysfunction that comes with ME. Well, if you're a bit like me and don't know everything there is to know about ME and long COVID, but you would like to know a bit more in bite-sized and digestible pieces, then Turn2 app is the place for you. Turn2 is a free app for anyone with ME and long COVID. It will provide you with small drops of information every day, which I love, and it will also tell you when you've had enough, which I also love. You can submit information and questions to the app, which others can read and answer. The app is well moderated, and any concerning information can be flagged and reported. If you mention Post-Exertional Mayonnaise podcast when you sign up and use our link in the description, our podcast will benefit. So even if you're not sure but want to try it, why not give it a go? You'll be helping us cover our costs. Thanks for listening, and we hope you enjoy this great episode. Hello and welcome to Post-Exertional Mayonnaise, a podcast about living with ME and chronic illness, creativity, and making meaning. Today, Anneke, I forgot to ask you, Anneke. I totally, it was on my list of things to do to ask you. That shows I'm tired. To ask you how to pronounce your name. Should we start again?
Well, if you want to, you can cut it out, but
I could just leave it in. But yes, tell us how to pronounce your name, because I meant to ask and it was on my list and I just missed.
It's a common occurrence. It's Anneke, as in, you remember Anneke Rice?
Yeah.
It's that kind of pronunciation.
And is it Vliegen or Vliegen or
No, Vliegen, as you did, perfect.
Anneke Vliegen, okay.
That's to say, that's how I pronounce it in English. I don't expect anybody who speaks English to pronounce it in the way we do here, which would be Anneke Vliegen.
Anneke Vliegen. Well, it's whatever you prefer, so yes.
Yeah.
I'm joined by Anneke Vliegen. Anneke is an author from Belgium whose book Recognise Me, a medical gaslighting memoir, was published during ME Awareness Month this year. Just recently. And Anneke got in touch with me back in April, May time. And what I wanted to do was, rather than just sort of do an episode together, I wanted to read the book first. So it's taken me a little bit of time to do that because I'm a slow reader. But I'm glad I did. And it's been a fascinating insight into your life. And maybe perhaps you could give us an overview of the book, which is essentially your story, isn't it? So I don't know where you want to start, because in the book, obviously, you kind of go right back to your childhood, which I found absolutely fascinating, and your ability to sort of like self-reflect and things through that was great. So I don't know if you want to sort of summarize the book, and then we can get into some of it.
It does tell my whole life story right from birth, really. But very much, it's a memoir. It's not a biography, because I really wanted to tell the story of medical gaslighting. And when I was writing it, I got more into the community of chronically, etc. people. I always say chronically ill, chronic, rare, possibly. Barely visible. I don't say invisible because there's always people close to us who know. So I say barely visible. And fluctuating conditions. Those are the ones I kind of bundle. And I would love to find a way of saying that briefly so that everybody knows what it means. But for now, just say it and write it, particularly in full term. But ME does not come under the rare because, there's millions of us across the world, isn't there? There's just too many, in my view. But so my book is very much my own story. It's very me. And I explain that in the book as well. I don't know if you noticed that. But I actually said, look, I'm just saying what worked for me and didn't, and what I experienced. I have no assumption that that would work for anyone else, or that this would be anybody else's experience. But basically, what happened was that looking back, there was signs in my childhood. There was always something wrong with me, but it didn't seem like the things were connected. Like I sprained my ankle countless times, and it was, Alex, somebody who sprains their ankles a lot. And I had varicose veins, internal varicose veins, when I was something like 14 years of age. I mean, there was no reason why anyone at that age would have that. The problem with my voice started when I was not noticing probably at the moment, but people might notice nearer the end of the interview that it's starting to fail a little. But it takes a bit of management now. But that was when I was in primary school, the fourth year of primary school. The teacher mentioned to my parents, I think you better have her voice looked at. These things don't sound like they're connected. And then in puberty, particularly, I became very, very tired, and my concentration lapsed and stuff like that. But there were enough things that could be pointed to, and puberty being one of them. I mean, I have pain in my knees all the time. Well, I got growing pains. But by the time I was 20, the exhaustion, the sheer exhaustion, there really isn't a word that expresses that well enough, is there? I was sleeping, I think, up to 15 hours a day, something like that. And I read an article in a magazine about ME, and I recognized myself in it. So I took that. I lived in England by then. I was born in Belgium, moved to England when I was 17 on my own, to be an au pair originally, and then ended up sticking there. But so I went back to Belgium to see my Belgian GP because I trusted him more than I did the English by then. And he did all the questioning that was needed to see, why do you think you've got this? What is it? So we went through all that. And he said, well, you might have that. There's very little known about this condition at the moment. This was I'm 52 now, so we're talking the very early 90s. But I do know of a specialist in our area here who's particularly specialized in that. So I'll send you to him. And within a few weeks, I was diagnosed. But he did find biomedical markers, and he had a drawer in his desk that he would open and pull research papers out and say, look, this is where it says that that's related to ME. But he did say, we don't really know enough about this condition to give a firm diagnosis. But all I can say is it really is pointing in that direction. So for the next 20 years, I had the great privilege of being medically gaslit because I had a diagnosis of ME chronic fatigue. And at first it was ME, and then it became chronic fatigue syndrome, and then it became the two together. And that had to do with the level of respect that I received when it was termed one or the other. But basically, I was only ill because I hadn't had enough attention as a child, because I liked being dependent too much. I used being ill as a symbol towards my friends, etc., etc. I moved back to Belgium when I went on incapacity. I became an occupational therapist, whilst working. I worked for about 5 years, I think. I did a postgrad in health research, which really did me in. I shouldn't have done that. That's a silly thing to say, really, because
I was reading that and thinking, oh, it's like you pushed yourself so hard to do that, and that came across in the book, didn't it? Very much so, that you sort of it was sort of slogging yourself to try and to achieve that, and so often, like, people, those of us with chronic illnesses, we do sort of like push ourselves really hard to achieve something, even often at the expense of our health, don't we? So yeah.
And that really was at the expense of my health. And I ended up on incapacity. I never professionally used any of the skills and knowledge that I learned there. But as a patient, it stood me in very good stead to have that. So anyway, back to Belgium, back to my doctors here. By then, the atmosphere around ME/CFS had become pretty much the way you know it over there in England as well. I had my trusted doctor. I had that specialist, but that specialist, he was very good at diagnostics. But after that, it was like, well, maybe you can try some magnesium kind of thing, not because he wasn't willing. It was just that there wasn't really anything. He looked at what he could find physically and responded to that, which was very minimal. And I had this, well, if you can't help me, I'm not coming back every 6 months just to have a report. I'll come back when I need a report for whatever benefit. But other than that, I'll just manage. I had the amazing luck to meet my husband, who became my husband. And despite knowing how ill I was and seeing how ill I was, he had dreamt of having children as well, and I was born to have children. And we made a conscious decision together to do that, and very much talked it through. And so we had our little boy, who, the day the book came out on the 15th of May, had his 18th birthday.
Mm-hmm.
So that was one of the launch the book, launch the child, or the other way around, actually. But yeah. That was really too much to ask of my body. I think a postgraduate did, but having a baby was really, but again, you can look back and say, should I have done that? I think the answer remains yes for both of those, really. It was the right decision at the time. There's no question. But I became more and more, we had this baby who then became a toddler and started going to preschool. And I was physically available, but asleep most of the time. In a room, I didn't need the pitch black, and I thankfully didn't need the constant silence as people with very severe ME do. But I was completely bedridden, to the point where my 3-year-old stood by me, and he stood by my bedside. His head came about level with mine as I was lying down, and he whispered, "Mummy, I think you're dying." I was like, I can't say I'm not. You can't anyway. I don't think, and I don't think you should lie to children about things like that. But it would have been the worst thing to do. But I felt I was dying. And I saw that, whether it was in newspapers or on Facebook, because I actually caught a lot of the news on Facebook. I did a lot of, I think they call it doom scrolling these days, don't they? Yeah. There was news that 2 doctors in Belgium were being fined for when they got patients with an ME diagnosis, and they were getting lots because everybody was starting to go to them. They actually investigated further. They didn't just stop at the ME diagnosis, and they treated very differently as well. And they were fined for it because it cost money. And I talked with John, my husband, about it. Should I try this? Is this worth trying? Talked to our GP, who was a different local GP to where we'd moved, but also someone we really had a good bond with. He'd become my GP because he was on call one night when our boy, doesn't like his name being used publicly. So you didn't hear that. But when he was ill, we needed an on-call doctor, and he'd come, and I'd asked him, "Do you know the condition, Emmy?" He said, "Yes." "Well, what do you think about it?" And testing the water, and his response, I don't know what it was anymore, but it was respectful, and that was what was important to me. So we were all agreed that I should try. And this is where my life started to change, because I started getting treatment, but I still was getting worse. I was being admitted on a regular basis to receive treatment through drips, and still I was getting worse. And I really felt I was dying. And one night in hospital, I actually said goodbye to everything mentally, and particularly to my husband and child, obviously. And the next morning, this doctor was sitting on my bed, and I said, "If you don't call a halt to this, it'll stop." And I heard a kerfuffle in the hallway. Now, if you've been in hospital a few times, you recognise, there's something urgent, there's something exciting going on. Somebody's not having a good day. But it turned out to be me. They ran into my room and put methylprednisolone, Midrol, we call it here, is what people know it by, but I don't know if that's the same over there.
I'm not sure.
It's a corticosteroid.
Okay.
And what they'd found was that I had a third of the lowest referenced value left in my blood. And that means that I was close to death. And I'd said goodbye to everything the night before. And it was like, see, I knew. A few hours later, I was showering myself with a pole, with drips. I was managing all that somehow. And it became a completely different story from then on, all of a sudden, because the endocrinologist was like, well, so you don't have ME. So it was considered a misdiagnosis. I don't know. I think we can talk about that. But they found lupus. My back was in so bad a state that it needed to really, one, just to get a hernia out, but the other was the most serious operation that particular doctor does in that hospital, as I learned recently. But it had never been investigated because I had ME, so I had pain.
Yeah.
Did I need some more antidepressants not to whinge about it? It was that kind of thing. All of a sudden, all that changed. But my mindset was very much on blaming me and questioning my own integrity and not trusting. But people have this in them to keep saying, listen to your body. And I was like, well, yeah, that served me well, hasn't it? No, it's not what I'm going to do. And also, I'd been spoon-fed that was the worst thing I could do. So, and actually, it turned out to be right, because another 10 years later, I think I've had about 16 operations or something like that in total. And I had the adrenal insufficiency, that's the low cortisol. A diagnosis, I had a lupus diagnosis, but that's completely under control. But eventually I got an EDS, Ehlers-Danlos syndrome diagnosis as well, hypermobile type. And this is apparently a very common experience for people with EDS. That they get either misdiagnosed, or what I did do, and I don't describe in the book because I hadn't really realized, not you said about self-reflection, I'm still in the process of self-reflecting, and I always will be, and writing the book has been, has really kind of pushed that forward. But what I did was cut myself off from the ME community almost completely, because I couldn't bear it emotionally. I couldn't bear other people's stories of getting gaslit. I couldn't bear other people's stories of being stuck with that diagnosis when I knew, because it had happened to me, that they probably had something else, because I had all the answers all of a sudden to everybody's suffering. And I was like, no, that's not healthy. That's not good for, I need it. Those conversations won't help them or me. I need to keep my distance. And so I did. It's really only through writing the book and through my publisher pointing me in the direction of, well, reading this, it really is a lot to do with ME, isn't it? Kind of thing, perhaps I should get back into it. And then I felt like such a fraud and like I don't belong with, I feel I owe that community something, but I don't necessarily belong in that community. But then when I read, things have progressed, the knowledge about it has progressed. And I still wonder whether I don't have the combination. Because at one stage, at that time, in the early days, it was in one of my reports, it does say post-viral, and there were viruses found, and the typical ones were found. So, yeah, I do wonder.
It's interesting, and there is so many sort of like intersecting conditions, aren't there, anyway, out there, in terms of like, and like we called our podcast an ME and chronic illness podcast, mainly because both Dove and myself, who set it up, kind of have both got ME, so we're talking about our lived experience. But we are aware that there are so many different intersecting conditions, and it's hard sometimes to sort of know where one begins and another ends for so many people, isn't it? And like for me, I know I've got kind of classic ME, and I don't have other condition. Well, maybe I do. I don't know. Maybe, like you say, like it's very hard to know. Kind of like,
Yeah.
without kind of going down very expensive routes and like significant amount of tests that so many of us can't really necessarily afford. Like, and for some people, it's almost like you stumble across another diagnosis for one reason or
Yeah.
another, don't you? Almost like,
Exactly.
which it sounds like for you, it was all of a sudden the adrenal insufficiency was sort of like discovered, and then you could see improvement in your health as well from different things. So it's it's difficult to know where one thing starts and another ends, and it was interesting because, like you say, you sort of lived so much of your life with the perception of having ME, so therefore that it can't not be a massive part of your life in a way, even if there's still question marks about whether you've got that diagnosis because of everything else that's kind of going on in your body
It's
as
still
well.
on file. And suddenly, in my notes, fibromyalgia appeared. And I
Mm,
questioned so many doctors about that. Who put that there? On what basis? How did they assess that? Where is the report that says that? Nobody knows. It appeared.
mm,
And finally, now we have a new GP. Been a few months since we've been seeing her. And I mentioned this to her, and she said, "You don't have it?" Well, not as far as I know. She said, "Fine." She took it
mm.
out. All the others are like, "Well, we can't erase it from your file. No, it's in there." She was like, "Don't have it. Here we go. Done."
That's funny because
Brilliant.
I got a copy of my medical records not too long ago, to provide to a private clinic. And I discovered that apparently I broke my leg when I was 6 years old, and and
You
and I
think
have
you remember?
no recollection of this whatsoever. And I spoke to my mum and I said,
Yeah.
did I break my leg when I was 6? Because I really don't remember this. And she was like, no, that never happened. So somehow, or maybe some other person my age has got did break their leg when they were 6, and there's no record of it in their records. I don't know, but there's clearly something's happened there, because I was like, I'm sure I didn't break my leg when I was 6. But yeah, sorry, that's a
No,
side
no,
matter. But yes, it just
that's
shows, doesn't
exactly
it,
the
that
kind
things
of
can
thing
end
that
up in
happens. Yeah.
yeah, things can end up in places that they shouldn't. Yeah, it's interesting.
And now I don't know how it is over there, because there's one of the things in my book is also the contrasts between the English and the Belgian approach to
Mm,
health and social services in general, and then particularly to people with the conditions that we're talking about.
mm.
And here we go. I forgot what I was going to say about that. The
um,
difference between the two. Let's go on to a different question when it comes
yeah, we
back.
might come back to that because
Yeah.
it was on my list, because it is a fascinating thing. But one of the things that I found that I was going to ask about was how you, because like you say, it's a memoir, and it's also, there is an also, it's not just about medical gaslighting, but it plays a big part in terms of um, your own sort of self perception, doesn't it? A little bit, because of the way that you were treated in so many different circumstances. But like, um, how was that a really difficult thing to write, to go back to those experiences and be very vulnerable, because like you're extremely vulnerable through the book, and that it draws you in while you're reading it. Was that difficult for you, or did it just kind of flow out of you? Was it something you started writing and it kind of just came out?
You when you wrote to me after you just finished it, the word you used was brutal,
Yeah, I think I put it
and
on my notes. Yeah.
it's eaten away at me. You said it
Sorry.
was brutal.
Not in a bad way.
No, no, I understood that.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I'm very much an emotional exhibitionist. I think always have been, and I really do believe in open and honest conversation. I think
Mm,
that's the only way to find solutions and to
mm,
understand each other and to be able to communicate properly. And I try to do that in the book. I try to also, reflect, but also reflect on where could that have come from? Were they really all, did they get up and think, let's just treat an ME patient badly today? I doubt that. They probably believed in what they were doing.
mm.
So again, you had asked something different.
No, just how yeah, was that a difficult process having to
Yeah.
like
Um,
reflect, like so again it kind of goes back to that kind of self-reflection a little bit, because you're having to kind of really go back to some really difficult points in your kind of in your life, really. And was that kind of like almost therapeutic, or was it actually quite painful?
the writing itself, I actually talked about this with my psychologist to
Yeah.
try to work out how this happened because I think you use particular, well, I know you use particular parts of your brain for particular activities and for
Mm.
particular functions. And in the writing, I was focused on the writing, on the wording, on the style, on the structure of the text and stuff like that. And they were stories that I have told 100 times to so many different people in different ways. There were some reflections that we knew as I was writing, but on the whole, I'd already told the story a lot of times. And a lot of it, once I got to where I'd started writing a blog, a lot of the material in the book actually sprouted from what I had already written in the blog. I also went through the history of my Facebook posts. I went through old
Mm.
emails and things like that. Um, and at one point that started to hinder me because I lost flow. So it was a juggling act with that. So that whole thing about writing it is the most, it's one of those cathartic exercises. None, I didn't have any of that. None.
Mm.
But when I read it, ooh, tears have flown. And still, when I
Wow.
read it, it overcomes me. And that's the only way to
Mm.
express it, really. And often in the positive parts, often in the joys, because it's not, I
Yeah.
hope it's not entirely morose when you read it.
No. No.
so, but it's often the contrast and the look where we got to despite. And my husband has the same. I mean, he was obviously the first person to be allowed to read it through. And he had a veto right because I'm also very brutally honest about what happened in our marriage under the
Mm.
strain of chronic illness and all the rest of life, really. And so I wanted to give him a veto right about that. And he read
Mm.
it and he said, if that's how you experienced it, then that's how it needs to be in there. It would be really wrong of me to apply any vetoes or ask you to rewrite or whatever because it wouldn't be your story anymore.
Mm.
But again, I hope I wrote it respectfully. That was
Yeah.
my aim to whoever I write about. I want to do it with the respect that I can muster for that particular person. Because I know there's a few people in there where it's a bit less obvious my respect for them because
Yeah.
that high. But I did do my best to do that.
Yeah, because that was actually kind of going to be my next question on my list, was about your relationships actually, because you talk about a previous relationship as well. So, but
Yeah,
um, that was going to be my question about your husband, and how you sort of like process that. But you've kind of like answered my question in a way. But I think one of the things that struck me was that um I wouldn't say it's like a taboo subject, relationships, when we talk about Emmy, but it's something that's like it's a very difficult thing to talk about, because um, we're all coming from very different perspectives. We're all in different relationships. Some of us aren't in relationships. So, um, and then how we sort of navigate the changes that happen in our lives, because like it is a huge it's a huge, I mean, I guess for you were kind of going into it where your partner knew about some of your conditions and your health issues, um but that's still and for many of us it's like suddenly we become ill, and when in a relationship, and then the dynamics change and we have to sort of like work through that, but I think what I appreciate about what you expressed within the book was some of the very real challenges of how isolating that chronic illness can become, not only for you and us when we're living with it, but also for our partners, because of how it impacts our relationships. So yeah, like thank you for kind of going into your relationship in that way, because so many of us maybe can't express that, or it's something that you know. So yeah, the fact that your partner's actually agreed to sort of like let you share those things,
yeah,
it's special, but it also enables other people to relate to some of the things that we all go through.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think one of the things that has been so crucial in our relationship is the communication, learning to communicate, learning to
Mm.
recognize the kind of stubbornness and bitterness that comes in, and to have it there and just say it, like one of the things that it's a bit of a running joke now, but it's very genuine as well. Is I will say, see how it translates now, because I say it in Dutch usually and it comes automatic. Uh, Leave me alone, but stay close so I can bark at you when I need to. That kind of
Oh,
thing.
yeah. Yeah.
So we're very. I think if they had cameras here, or if anybody was to stay with us for any length of time, they would probably just, but not long enough to get to know, or, to get to know it deeply.
Mm.
They would observe us as being really rude and short-tempered with each other, because often we communicate very brief commands almost. And when you're chronically ill and dependent and extremely tired and brain fogged, and
Mm.
to be able to communicate in socially acceptable terms is extremely difficult. And I'm really grateful to my husband for just having learned to accept that and understand that. And sometimes he barks back, and he's every right to, but most of the time we do it that way. And what we didn't mention yet is that my son has, I've been very generous with my genes, so we share the EDS and the adrenal insufficiency. And between us, often it's expressed somehow like it's your turn or it's my turn to not cope. You know,
Mm.
I don't have the tolerance at the moment. Can you handle it? Yes, okay. You can bark at me, but we'll swap when we need to swap. Or hopefully, I mean, there's more times when when things are just okay, and we obviously, I mean, we have a very loving family between the three of us, and most of it is smooth sailing. And well, not most of it, but the interactions are. But we have dealt with really, really tough stuff. And the only way
Mm.
I believe we could do that was by talking and being as open and honest and as what you might call brutal, but to each
Mm.
other. And also, I think our boy was about maybe 9 years old, thereabouts, roughly speaking. Um, when he said, "Mum, there's something I really admire about you." Wow. My 9-year-old or whatever he was is going to say something good about his mum to her. Um, he said, "You can be so angry and so, volatile in my anger as well. But if I put a good argument to you or give you a good reason why something has happened a particular way, or whatever, you'll take it."
Mm.
Um, and I do. He was right. I do that. And I
Mm.
think to some extent I do that in the book as well, that,
Mm.
make the distinction between this is my emotional response and I have every right to feel that emotion, and I will respond to that emotion. But actually, I understand the reason and I will come back to the reason once I've got rid.
Mm.
And we allow that for each other as well.
Mm.
Like,
Mm.
if you need to vent, you need to vent. We'll come back to it later, that kind of thing.
Mm. Yeah. It's finding ways to sort of like finding paths and ways of living together, isn't it? In relationships where you can manage the illness in a in a way that works for everybody involved, isn't
Yeah.
it? It's never easy. Yeah.
And we do continually make decisions that other couples wouldn't make. We make our own. We said that to each other from the start. It's our rules. We don't have to be able to explain them to anyone else. If it works for us, then it works.
Mm.
And when it
Mm.
doesn't work anymore, it needs reevaluating. That's the other thing.
Mm. Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to ask about friendships as well, because you talk a lot about how kind of different, like maybe friends coming in and out of your life and things, and obviously you're going back over like 40 something, however many years until from when you started the book, and even you talk even as a child about how you relate to other children, for example, and yeah, like So how did you kind of how do you manage losing friendships? It's hard, isn't it? Like, have you got any sort of suggestions for other people? Because obviously, it's something that's come through the book, and it's something that we've covered on the podcast in the past about losing friendships or relationships, and how friendships just sort of seem to dry up or disappear, or we end up very much like living online and having online friendships and things, don't we? And yeah, how has that been for you in terms of like looking back when writing the book again, thinking about friendships that have been lost and thinking about why that's happened? Because you talked about almost people kind of like distancing themselves from you a little bit, didn't you? And that's really painful.
Yeah, it is. And I think a lot of the subject we've already touched on are about grief.
Mm.
It's like a continual grief. And um, I'm veering off, so you remember what we were talking about and bring me back to it. But I had written the bit about, I asked for grief work at one point when I was still in England. And I was actually told with a condition of ME that was laughable. If I had something like AIDS or AIDS particularly was mentioned, then that
Yeah.
would be acceptable, but not with what I was suffering. And my publisher read the book to give me some feedback before it went to the editor, and she'd written "What grief?" But of course, that's how I read the question. Afterwards, having gone through the whole process of editing and proofreading, and you have no idea how many times, I mean, maybe you do, I don't know, but the whole thing keeps get rehashed and rehashed and rehashed and rehashed. So I know, I assume now that she was saying you need to expand on this because the reader needs to know specifically. I
Got you,
think that
as in
was her
what
question
grief? Where
rather
is it?
than,
Yeah.
what reason do you have to grieve?
Yeah.
That's how I read it. But again, because of how we are treated,
Mm.
and how I was for 20 years. But I've just very recently had another one of those days, and it hits me just as hard, even though I've written a book about how to. I'm in a different place now. It took me 10 years to actually free myself from some of the effects, but not by a mile from all of it. It keeps popping up, but it's in a different way. It's like, oh, here it is again, kind of thing. I need to go through the emotion and then deal with it, rather than living with that constantly. It's changed. But you were going to bring me back to what the actual question was.
Yeah, it was about friendships. Yeah,
French.
but the grief is really real in friendships, isn't it? Because we
Yeah.
lose friendships. Yeah, yeah.
But I think one thing that we do, and I try to avoid doing, and I would, if you're asking advice, I would advise to avoid doing that, is thinking this is happening because we're chronically ill, or because we've got ME, or because we've got anything else. Friendships going in ebb and flow is a part of life for everyone. I think it hits us harder sometimes because we attach it to, I'm doing it wrong. It's because I'm ill. They can't bear it anymore. Sometimes that's true. But so the other thing I would say is good riddance, frankly. And I say that to friends, not out, I don't immediately say good riddance to them. But I actually say to people that come into my life, look, I will make plans. I refuse to give up on making plans. I know some people live by just not making the plans, and that's the safest thing for them to do. For me, I get so much joy out of the things that I can do when I can do them, that I do make plans, but 8 times out of 10 I have to cancel. I've never counted that, but just that's how I put it to people. So if you're the kind of person that needs things to go through as planned, then we'll just have to accept that and leave it there, or find a way of working around it, or whatever. but I'm very explicit. I've learned, for me, being explicit works really, really well in friendships.
Mm.
It's the right people, in,
Mm.
connected. And I have friendships that go back 40 years, or almost 40 years, as well as having had friendships that I've lost.
Mm.
And some of them, like I say, could really need to weed a garden.
Mm.
And they're the right people for other people. There's
Yeah.
nothing wrong with
Yeah.
them, nothing friendship wise wrong with me, particularly. Although I do go into doubting that and all that, the stuff that people do. But those are not the friends for me. Somebody said to me once, choose those people or be with those people whose eyes light up when you enter the room.
Mm.
And I remember that. And do you remember the show This Is Your Life?
Yeah, 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 yeah. Michael Aspel back in the
Michael
yeah, back in the
Aspel,
80s
yeah.
and 90s, yeah.
And there was a lady on there, I think, was it the Bisto commercials? Was it Bisto? I thought it was called Gravy. Bistro.
Possibly. Yeah, yeah, Bisto Gravy, yeah.
It was a family, and she was the mother, but she was also in television shows and in series, but can't remember her name at the moment.
Yeah.
But she was on This Is Your Life, and every single person that entered, the moment they entered, her whole face lit up. She was like, "Oh wow! Like this is the best thing that could happen to me that you entered." And then the next person, and she did it again, and it was very natural. It wasn't show. That's what she
Yeah.
did. That was her, and I thought that's who I want to be.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
what I want to be, and that's how I want people to feel when they see me too. And if that
Yeah.
disappears in both directions, then you're better off without.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's hard, and it's finding the people that, and I think I've got to say, like, the people that I'm closest to friendship wise are the ones that I've made along the way, like over the last few years living with Emmy, and there have been online friendships,
Yeah.
and I hope to meet some of those people one day. Do you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
that would be that would be amazing to be able to do that, and you never know what the future holds as well. So yeah,
Exactly.
yeah. Do you want to tell us a little bit about medical zebras? Because obviously they're on the front of your book, and
He goes with me to every book event.
it's
I think
brilliant.
it's a he. Check.
Hard to tell, really.
Sorry.
Um, Annika's holding up a stuffed zebra just in case people are listening on the audio
Yes.
and
I
don't know
was.
what we're doing. But yeah,
Sorry.
and it's on the front of the book as well. So
Yeah, I'll show you the book for the people that can see as well.
yeah,
So it's
um,
mum and boy.
and I hadn't heard the term medical zebras until I read it in your book. So do you want to tell us a little bit about what one is and how it relates to the medical gaslighting?
Yes, and it has struck me that the main health community, patient community that I belong to, I feel is the EDS community. And
Mm.
you type EDS into Google or any search engine, and whatever you find about it, unless it's from PubMed or something like that, but anything you find on EDS will have a zebra on it somewhere. And the
Mm.
same goes for a few other conditions, but EDS specifically have kind of clamped on to the zebra. And it, by re-entering the ME world tentatively at first, but people like you really helped me kind of reconnect with that and feel worthy of reconnecting as well. But by doing that, I've realised that ME patients, zebras you find in the zoo or somewhere in Africa, don't you? Or in cuddly toys.
Mm.
But the story goes, and I've checked this because I did a talk at Leeds University with. It was meant to be for all the faculties, but the ones that turned up were the ones from the Faculty of Medicine, staff and students, which I really appreciated.
Mm.
And so I checked with them, and it is true that in training, doctors are told if you hear who's, so hold your ear to the ground when you're diagnosing. If you hear who's, think horses. And
Mm.
so when a patient comes and complains of tiredness, which doesn't go away by sleeping, and I always feel drained and I can't do anything, then you think, well, what's your sleep hygiene routine? Do you eat
Yeah.
healthily? Drink enough water? Do you exercise enough? Do you rest enough? Do you do any relaxation exercises? I can go on, can't I? You know,
Mm.
kind of stuff I'm talking about. And they keep coming back. And they keep saying it's not helping. So it's got to be something wrong with them. It's just their attitude, isn't it? They're probably not doing it right. I've told them everything I can think of. So it's
Mm.
actually a very understandable position for a doctor or a therapist to be in. I really have grown into that by this whole project, actually, that I would probably do the same. The
Mm.
last thing I would do is think zebras or deer
Mm.
or whatever, doe or whatever. There's so many hooved animals that they're not all horses. And
Mm.
so if somebody keeps coming back and the treatment that you and the advice that you usually give to the horses doesn't work, perhaps there's something else going on there. And you may not, I mean, doctors are very short in resources as well. They don't have time. They don't get the right to spend time. They don't have the right to spend money on their
Mm.
patients to order. They're restricted in what investigations they can order. And so when I was speaking to the faculty of medicine in the School of Medicine, it's called, in Leeds, I was asked the question, what can we teach our students that would avoid medical gaslighting happening? I hadn't thought of that. I get asked questions
Mm.
I would have never thought of myself. So there was and as soon as I heard the question, one word shot through my head instantly. So I said, look, I think I can answer it with one word, but we'll expand on it a bit afterwards. But humility.
Mm.
If you don't know, you don't know. I can't think of any chronic patient that I have ever communicated with or seen writing stuff on Facebook or whatever, who would actually mind a doctor who says, I don't know.
Yeah.
In fact, they would probably embrace them, you
Mm.
know. Just say it. And if that means that you have to go and do research, then you have to go and do research. But if you don't have the time and the money to investigate further, again, say that. It's that same thing I was saying about being honest and open in relationships. Just acknowledge it and say it. Look, I really wish I could do this for you, but I can't. What I can do is help you in your symptoms. What are they? Let's see. What can I do? But if you do that, if you have to say, I really wish I could do A, B, and I can't, then you have to trust what your patient says because you can bet your bottom dollar they have done the research. And they
Mm.
might not have done it in the way that you would have, and they might not have the background and the training that you have, but you haven't got the time. You just said it yourself.
Mm.
So trust them, go
Mm.
with them, work in tandem.
Mm. Mm. Yeah, it would be. Um, yeah, it'd be great. And we've talked before about. I talked to. We did an episode a couple of months ago with my childhood pediatrician, who was an ME specialist, and
Oh, no.
and it was really interesting because I was kind of like, I think I first saw him when I was like 10 years old, and he sort of went on to become significant within ME circles in terms of challenging the medical profession, actually, often in terms of things like what was called sort of like Munchausen's by proxy, or
Yeah,
fabricated illness, induced
yeah.
illness. So he's done a lot of work in that area, but and now I've forgotten my train of thought. What, where were we going? Oh yes, we
Humility.
were talking. We were talking almost about, it was a question I asked him about why certain doctors are in the way they are, um, and again, it was in terms of sort of along my train of thought was that often there isn't anything that can be done for people with ME, particularly. Like I haven't seen a doctor for a while because there's
Yeah.
I haven't had a lot to raise with them or whatever, but so it's often doctors want to be able to do something. I'm reluctant to say sort of God complex, but often there is that sort of element of that, isn't there? And actually, if they can't then solve the problem, then they can't. There's an ego maybe issue there somehow, isn't there? At times.
I wonder. I used to see it that way. I've slightly, and there are some like that. That there's.
Yeah, many of us had those experiences. So yeah,
But I
we
think
can't
also
we can't
often
stereotype.
But I also think often it's a very genuine frustration of not being able to help, rather than I want to prove how almighty I am, that
Yeah.
it's not working. Why is it not working? And that it is a very human, natural frustration. But instead of acknowledging that and owning it and putting it out there, I mean, I don't suggest the doctors should say to their patients, "I get really frustrated when you come in," but if they can be honest with themselves about that and put it to one side and say, "Look, it's sheer helplessness. I don't know what to do," that would actually help the patient more than hinder them.
Mm.
I don't think it's necessarily because they're so convinced that they know everything. I think in some cases it is very clearly, but
Yeah.
I actually don't think that's the majority
No.
personally.
Yeah.
But
And I think.
I can only speak. I have realised more and more because by writing the book, I did an online course on how to write. I knew I could write well enough for a reader to appreciate what I wrote, but that's quite different to writing a book. It's a really different process. So I decided to do some free online courses. And one of the things that said was I needed to build a community that was chomping at the bit to read it as soon as I started to write, because otherwise it wouldn't sell. Oh, great. That's exactly what I was looking to do. So, anyway, started a Facebook page and it all came from there. But what I've really come to realize is how easy my story has been, how lucky I have been in so many ways, how privileged I've been to get to the point. And it almost made me stop at one point because I was like, how dare I come with this book? And there's people so much worse off, so much treated in so much worse ways, so much more lonely, so much more unlucky in love. There's so many things that could have gone wrong that went okay for me. But then I realized it's because of those privileges, because I've had that luck, that I can write the book, that I can raise a voice against that kind of treatment, that I can say, look, every single patient deserves respect and dignity, and it should be given it implicitly and explicitly. So I went ahead, but it really did humble me.
Yeah, I'm just reading. Just a quote that I'd copied from your book, and it might be quite useful just to read that because it kind of it ties in, and it was one of the things that I thought was really helpful to talk about maybe before we finish around kind of like how we can blame ourselves for our illness and things, and
Gaslight
then
ourselves, don't we, in the end?
yeah, and then obviously for you the shift in how you were perceived once you were given more respectable, I suppose, is that the right word, diagnoses maybe?
That's
So
how I feel about it as well, yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
so I'll just read this. You said, I came to the shocking realization that being taken seriously was frightening. I had to accept being cared for in other ways than I had previously. Life had tried to teach me that being dependent on support often meant losing the right to be treated as equal. I had rejected this idea. Anyone out to ascribe me a role of powerlessness, ignorant victim, met a challenge. Somehow it was easier when I could blame or at least doubt myself, though. Um, yeah, and I thought it'd be useful to talk about maybe the ways in which living with chronic illness strip us of dignity and how the systems appear to be set out to do just that. And there is something around dignity being really important, isn't there? And somehow we there's an element that we take on what's been said about us, and then we sort of self-gaslight ourselves, don't we, to an extent, because we tell ourselves, well, maybe maybe because of this or because of that, or was, if I hadn't done this, I wouldn't have got ill, or all this sort of stuff that we sort of like somehow pin it to things in our lives, don't we? And I really appreciate the way that you sort of unpacked that within the book as well. It was really helpful.
I had a few rants in the book as well. Oh, if you hadn't done this to me, or to the community of people with ME, CFS. Sorry, we said this before the recording started, but I assume it'll be mostly patients with an ME/CFS diagnosis that watch this, or other chronic illnesses. You know what brain fog's like, so please allow me to do these circles where I distract myself from the essence of what we were going to say and then forget what it was, which has happened again. So could you restart me?
Yeah, just about the ways in which, I suppose, we were talking about sort of self-doubt, self-blame. We can stereotype ourselves sometimes, can't we? And then we're sort of stripped of dignity through the medical systems that are meant to support us, aren't we? Somehow, often.
And actually, in this process I've come across people who pay short shrift to medical gaslighting right from the start, who actually go, "You're going to treat me like that? Goodbye." And in Belgium, we have free choice of doctor. We can go to specialists directly. We don't need the referral from a GP. So that, again, is a privilege here. Having said that, the social care is so much worse, which you can read in the book as well. You've probably seen the home care stories that are in there, and they're all true. They're all happened. That was much, much better on the English side of things, but the medical side is stronger here. But I think it's actually in the paragraph after what you've written, but I don't know my book by heart. But I read. But a friend of mine she's one of the ones that we go back to when we were 14 and we're 52 now. And we were born 10 days apart, actually. So, yeah, we became friends when we were 14. And so she's been through a lot with me, and I've been through a lot with her. And she said, "Of course you're having trouble accepting these genuine conditions." That's another one. ME's not genuine, is it? Of course you're having difficulty. You'd rather it was something psychological, wouldn't you? Because then you can gain control over it. You can flick that switch. And that is how I allowed myself to be gaslit for 20 years and beyond, because I actually bought into it. I actually thought, maybe I can get a handle on this. Maybe they're right. And very much like in the last podcast I saw of yours, what was the person's name who has cancer now?
Oh, Jeffrey, was it?
Yeah, it was Jeffrey.
Yeah.
I've done it again. I said it was going to last 2 hours if necessary, but clearly not.
Yeah,
where did I start with Corinne saying? No, I've completely lost it. Tell me again. Sorry.
I can't remember now.
As well.
We're doing the same thing as us. Yeah, yeah. I think we're probably getting to the end of our rope, end of our tether.
I think so. Yeah.
End of our wick. Yeah, medical gaslighting, dignity, things like that, the systems and things like that. Yeah, you mentioned something that had been mentioned in our previous episode with Jeffrey, talking about cancer and how cancer was it around something around that?
Sorry. It's just blank. It started with that conversation, wasn't it, where she said you'd rather. No, sorry, I can't do
That's
it.
That's all right. We've had a really
that's a spectacular fail there.
We'll just stop the podcast now.
I'm professional,
It's all right, and it's good when we sort of like get to this point sometimes, because it kind of like really demonstrates the reality of what
Absolutely.
of what, you know. Yeah, I've been in bed most of today because like I've been sort of wiped out, and then I had a shower, and then we've sort of done this, and it's been a brilliant conversation, but it just highlights how we can just, our brains just start to seize up, don't they?
Yeah, it
And
just
and
floats really
that's
odd.
so frustrating at times.
But I have very much started to try and show the bit that remains invisible, because it's usually not invisible to the people who are very, very close to us, because they see us when we're unwell. We only get to be seen socially when we're well enough to make the effort to be seen socially. You know? And so on Facebook, I will post the pictures of me looking dreadful, and and here now this happens. Well, it is a natural part of our process and how we live, and the reality of that, like you said. And I think if we all did that more confidently, and I'm not saying I'm doing it confidently by any measure, but if we all did and got rid of the shame of looking like that or seeming like that, or if we just did it and be seen in our vulnerability, medical gaslighting would soon take a dive.
Mm, mm,
Because a lot of it is also because they don't see it. We tell them, but they don't see it.
mm,
And
yeah, it
again,
seems like,
that's a very human thing.
yeah.
Because we're actually, I, we went to a museum in Maastricht, an optical illusions museum, and there my penny dropped about, with all of these optical illusions there was a big card with explanation of what the brain does. And the brain does generalize. It sees one thing and it recognizes it to be it relates to something that's been seen before, so it interprets it. Interprets it as such. Can't speak anymore either.
Pareidolia, is
Can't
that
think anymore.
pareidolia?
Can't speak anymore.
I think it might be called pareidolia, is it? When you
Yeah,
sort of, you see something and you attach it to, yeah, like you said,
yeah. And
something you've seen
so,
before.
person appears in front of you looking perfectly healthy, and they're telling you they're very, very ill, and they have a lot of pain, and this, that, and the other. But you see them healthy.
Mm,
So it is actually the responsibility of the patient. And sometimes we're just too ill to do it. I absolutely acknowledge that. But it is somehow down to us to give the context and to give the explanation. And one of the things, for example, that helped me was when I learned about functional hours, and I looked at that for my life, and I can generally, and it's been true throughout my adult life looking back, I have about 4 to 5 functional hours a day on
mm,
average. Because then when I thought, well, that's rubbish, isn't it? Because you did your studies. Yeah, I did my studies, but we had long holidays in the summer, for example, and I worked from sick leave to sick leave, and sick leave meant being
yeah.
bedridden for weeks or months, and then working for a while again, where I did do more than my 4 hours.
Mm,
So on average, it's been 4 to 5 hours for me, and I have not been able to expand on that. What I have been able to do, though, is to improve the quality of those 4 to 5 hours, my level
mm,
of functioning in those 4 to 5 hours. But it still comes to that, yeah.
mm,
But explaining that to a doctor, because when we went to this new GP the first time, I actually made an appointment just to get to know her and to take my lovely little letter about being gaslit. I now, when I meet a new professional, I go, read this first. I'll see how you respond to that. And then,
mm,
depending on that, you could work with me. It's a business interaction. They get paid. They're
mm,
I'm in charge here. It's my body kind of thing. Um, and I had taken my care worker, my key worker with me. I don't know how you translate it because it doesn't quite translate. This terminology isn't quite the same. So the doctor said, but you look reasonably well. This letter suggests otherwise, and what you tell me does, but you've also come in with somebody to support you when you're actually sitting here explaining it rather well and looking.
mm,
So I'm missing something. I thought that was wonderful that she phrased it in that way. I am missing something. Can you tell me what it is? And so I used the functional hours thing and others. And they're woven into my book. I don't have a list of these ways to do it, but they're woven in there. And that does seem to work well if you give the context, if you take them out of the optical illusion.
Mm.
Because that's the same as with the optical illusion ones as well. On the card it says if you look at it like this, you'll see it. Because depending on which one it is, you have to go and stand in a different corner or something, or
Mm.
clipboard side or whatever. And you get it. And it's the same. And then you can't unsee it anymore. You can't see it as the illusion anymore. And the same appears, for me so far, has worked, that if I've been able to take somebody out of the optical illusion, they stay out.
Mm.
They stay. I feel like they're really on my team from then on. And then
Mm.
they usually leave and somebody comes and I have to
You got to
retrain them
start
again.
again. Yeah. Yeah, it's about helping professionals to have a bit of a paradigm shift, isn't it? And how they sort of see the illness, and it's hard because we've all got a responsibility to educate, but also have a bit of patience at the same time, and also it shouldn't always be our responsibility. There's we do have there's people that have had sort of little campaigns across here about trying to get things like ME on taught at medical schools because it's just not taught, and
Same with EDS.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So many conditions. So yeah, it's yeah, we've had a good conversation, haven't we? And we've been all over the place a little bit, but it's been
Oh,
good. And
sorry.
no, not your fault. No, not at all.
It just happens.
And
I've noticed that in the other ones that I've listened to as well, that it's always like you just go from one to the other. And I
yeah, we
love
just
that
get we
tempo.
have a wander.
Yeah,
We have a wander,
yeah.
and that's good. And yeah,
It adds to the
how
richness of what you do. I think I really admire the way you do them because you do get to the bones of what you're
yeah,
talking
thank you.
about. I've
Um,
noticed
it's been really good to talk, and I think yeah, I always say that I say this to everyone earlier. It's like, oh, it'd be great to have you back on because I think it almost like we could do a part two. But I think that's
that.
something I think maybe we've taught we have done sort of a bit of a mini series on medical gaslighting, and I think it's something that we'll probably continue to do going forwards. But what I would say is to people, if they are interested, look to get a copy of Anneke's book. We'll put links.
More. There you go.
It's available wherever you get books. It's in English, and
Yes.
it's a really yeah.
And it's
It's a
reasonable English, isn't it? It's not like a
it,
foreigner's English, particularly.
it's very well written, I must say. So yeah. So thank you for writing it, and thank you for yeah, getting in touch. And it's been yeah, it's been good. And I'll put links for maybe your Facebook and anything else you want to send us, and people can get hold of the book. And yeah, it's been really good to chat. So was there anything else you wanted to add before we finished?
Oh, well, just a big thank you for your support in my efforts, really, because can't do it without. Yeah.
Yeah, and sorry, it took me a while to read your book, but I'm glad I did it, and I think it made for a much more richer conversation because yeah, I'd rather
I did.
have taken the time to read the book and then had the conversation rather than kind of just chat about a book I haven't written. So it's been good. So yeah,
Yeah, and you really did just put, because I've had podcasts where people have read the book before who are not ME patients. Um, and it's usually the kind of questions are also challenging and whatever, but much more to the surface. You really do. You were like, we're having brutally honest. Love that.
sorry.
Love that. No, I thought it was brilliant. It opens up opportunities to talk about things that are rarely talked about.
Yeah, no,
And
it's been good.
I
So
really believe in open and honest communication. I really do.
yeah,
Yeah. If we did
yeah.
that more as a community as well. But it's a very, very tough, it's getting rid of the shame and the guilt to be able to do that. It's not easy.
Mm, mm. Yeah, and I think by talking about it, it's the only way that we can really process it, isn't it? So yeah, it's
And
yeah,
it is up to those of us who can, because some are too ill and others just, it's not in them.
mm,
I was born talking. You know, it's like, there's no stop button. There's a start, but not a stop button. And I had that example anyway. I was in a very talkative. So I kind of feel those of us who can have a kind of responsibility almost.
Yeah.
Not saying there could be different reasons for not being able to. They don't have to be the illness and they don't have to be the skill. There can be any number of reasons. I'm not assuming anything. But for me, I certainly feel like, yeah, I need to do this. It feels like a calling now. It really does.
Mm.
Yeah,
Mm.
it sounds a bit big-headed, but it does.
Yeah. And also your blog is really helpful as well. So there'll be lots of stuff on the blog
Oh, yeah.
that you can kind of
We
dig
didn't
into as
talk
well.
about
So
it in the end.
we didn't talk about the blog in the end, but yeah, I think there's some really rich stuff on there, and there's almost
Thank
we
you.
were going to talk about like almost like you'd written something that could have been like an addendum to the book, really. But maybe we can talk about that in the future.
Yeah, maybe we'll see where that goes. It's one of these things that's only
Yeah.
hitting the news, so to speak, isn't it? But yeah.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, thanks a lot, and yeah,
Um,
do look into the book, and we'll speak again. Thanks.
all
Take
right.
care.
Thanks. Bye bye.